The Fate series is one of, if not the most, complexly vast multiverses I've encountered in anime. From the alternate realities to the very deep lore of the universe. The goal of this video is to lay out a polished timeline of events that your average anime enjoyer can understand without reading 300 Reddit posts and half the Fate wiki page. Fate holds a dark and unique story behind the great wall of spin-offs, so allow me to show you the good and some of the more questionable side of Fate. But first things first, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. While at first glance the universe of Fate seems hard to grasp, if we keep in mind the source material of the series, it's easier to understand. Fate originally started with a visual novel released in the early 2000s named Fate Stay Night. In said game, there are 3 major routes, each completely different from the other, resulting in a fork in the road. What ends up happening is each route got their own series, these being Fate Stay Night, Limited Blade Works, and Heaven's Feel. None of these come in any logical order because they all contradict. They are separate universes, no real order to them. Then there's Fate Zero, which takes place before Stay Night as a prequel and linking point to the 3 divergent points, covering the 4th Grail War, which I'll give you more of an idea of what that is soon. Zero is followed up by 8 major spin-offs to place on a timeline. Today's menu for the Emiya family is a spin-off cooking show that sees the greatest warrior of all time return to her gender role. Lord El Malloy 2 Case Files, I think I said that right, is more of a mystery surrounding mages than the usual Fate series. Fate Prototype is an unfinished anime that was the starting point for what ended up becoming the original Fate Night series. Fate Strange Fake Whispers of Dawn is Fate if a shadow organization created a false Grail War. Fate Apocrypha is Fate if Zero and Stay Night never happened and the 4th Grail War was pushed into the distant future. Fate Extra Last Encore is a strange alternate timeline where souls of masters are picked out of reality and chosen to fight in a grand Grail War. Fate Collided Linear Prisma Ilia is a magical shoujo that toes the line of being morally questionable to watch. While I may have been very young at the time I watched it, I weep for the purity I lost as my eager eyes consumed 4 full seasons. That is time I will never get back. And we can leave it at that. And finally, Carnival Phantasm is the main Fate Studio Type Moon's crossover universe where all the Fate characters don't have to die a rather horrible death. And with that, we've covered all the major anime spin-offs, and we can focus on what most of you probably want to understand better. The Fate Zero and Stay Night timeline, aka the only one I found to be narratively amazing. We'll start in the Age of Gods, go through Zero, then divert into the 3 alternate timelines and make sense of how we got into each one and what the ending would mean for the future of the universe. If you weren't a fan of Fate before, you will be by the end, and as a treat I'll give you my personal order to watch the Fate universe at the end of this video. I shifted through all the mindless spin-off slop to find the golden ones worth watching, so leave it to the Sensei to make sense of Fate. The lore of Fate starts at the genesis of Earth. From this point up to 12,000 BC, the gods were the prominent beings of the world, existing in physical forms. Norse, Roman, Greek, Shinto, all of these gods coexisted and directly influenced living creatures on Earth. That is until the invasion of Safar, an anti-cell, basically meaning she's an extraterrestrial whose sole goal was to wipe out intelligent life. Many gods perished against Safar, but she was eventually defeated with the holy sword Excalibur. However, her destruction had destroyed more than 80% of life on Earth, and so the gods' power slowly became dimmer. In response, the gods of Mesopotamia created Gilgamesh, a half-human, half-god hero, who they hoped would bridge the world of gods and humans, once more breathing strength into their existence. But Gilgamesh rebelled against the gods, pushing for complete separation of the 2 worlds. In 2600 BC, the decline of the Age of Gods accelerated, and the gods lost physical form, becoming divine spirits, unable to directly interfere with the creatures living on Earth. The Norse gods would fall to Ragnarok in 1000 BC, and the great mage Solomon would die in 900 BC. All which had a great effect on the belief of the mystery that gave these phenomena such as gods and magic power. The end of the Age of Gods was a slow decline till 700 BC, when an unknown trigger would act as the true end and a new beginning of the Age of Man. It is said that the Earth abides to the principles of the most prosperous species, so man's Earth abided by the laws of physics. The laws of mystery from the Age of Gods mostly disappeared. The spirits of the gods, along with all other phantasmal species, moved to the reverse side of the world, an alternate plane of existence where the spirits maintain their mystery abilities. Even in light of this new age, there are some who wish to return to the world that was ruled by mystery. The desire for magic to return influenced the creation of the Holy Grail Wars. The original goal of beginning this war was to conduct a ritual that would allow a group of mages to recover a lost magic known as the Third Magic. This magic was a means of reaching a place known as the Root, or Akasha, the origin point of everything, including all human souls and ideas. With the help of 2 other mage families, the Einsburn family would re-seize this magic and access the root, which they believe will give them the capabilities of becoming a god. The other 2 families, Tosaka and Mato, help set up the mechanics for the ritual, that being the summoning of what are known as servants, usually heroes from the Age of Gods, who are summoned to masters, usually mages, whether they know they have the capabilities to be one or not. The Grail chooses masters by picking someone from each of the 3 families that started the ritual, and from there choose others who they see fit until the total number of masters reaches 7. These masters will use their servants to fight to the death, the point being that the soul of the servant, once vanquished, will be deposited into the Lesser Grail that is like a proxy for the Greater Grail. Upon the defeat of all servants, the remaining master and servant will touch the Grail, granting them access to the void, which leads to Akasha. In reality, the 7th and last servant will be consumed by the Grail momentarily to open the void, before sending all servant souls back to their rightful place. This is again all for the goal of re-obtaining the 3rd magic, and in the case of the Tosaka family, they're just interested in reaching Akasha. These 3 families choose the location of Fuyuki for the Grail ritual, as when being prepped for the first ritual, the Holy Church and Magic Association were locked in a bloody war in the west, so the eastern land of Japan seemed a good option, and Fuyuki was a probable location for the summoning of the whole to Akasha. The first Holy Grail War would take place in 1810, and it was drastically different from any preceding Grail conflict. There never was supposed to be a power struggle, originally only planned to be a ritual to allow the 3 main magic families to access Akasha, but they realized that only one can enter Akasha using this Grail. So came the Heavens Feel procedure of conflict between masters and servants. To coax the 4 randoms into coming, they sent a note stating they manifested the Grail and they should join to witness the miracle. What the families seem to not have thought of is these 4 mages would likely try to seize the Grail for themselves in their own dreams, which, along with the conflict between the 3 families, sparked a battle to the death, ending before the ritual could complete. The first Holy Grail War becoming something of a skirmish. The Grail takes time to store up enough magic to recommence the ritual, so began a 50-year preparation phase of the 3 families, knowing that what is to come this time around will be nothing short of a war. In 1860, the Second Holy Grail War made it clear the lack of rules for the conflict was a shortcoming, the war ending with all masters dead, no surviving victor. Years pass as the Grail regains power and the families think of ways to regulate the bloodbath they know will return with the ritual. In 1939, on the brink of World War II, the Third Holy Grail War commenced. The Eisburn family grew tired of the ongoing conflict and failed ritual. With only their lust for the return of the 3rd magic, instead of summoning their stereotypical berserker-class hero, they summoned the Zoroastrian god Angra Mainyu, an Iranian god of destruction and evil. He would eventually perish in the conflict, but his summoning and death altered the Grail and its abilities. His soul being absorbed by the Grail corrupted it, changing the rules of war of future conflicts. The Grail War would end in a total loss, the Japanese Imperial Army and the Nazis becoming involved, and the Grail being destroyed during battle, making the bloodshed pointless. Angra's soul's presence in the Grail would alter the Grail's capabilities to allow villains and monsters to be summoned as servants in future conflicts, not just heroic spirits. The Grail would also become corrupt in a way that would not be understood till the events of Fate Zero, which is where we find ourselves now. The first Holy Grail War that is directly viewable, and one shoot in bloodshed and betrayal. Due to the last 3 Grail Wars ending with no victory, and one reoccurring problem being that the Lesser Grail gets destroyed before the end of the conflict, the Eisburn family creates a homunculus to act as its proxy, that being Iris. The Einsburns also hire the well-known Magnus killer, Kiritsugu, who is the husband of Iris. Kiritsugu decides to act in the shadows during the Grail War to take out the other masters, while his wife acts as a proxy master of his servant Saber. The Tosaka family chooses Tokiomi to be their master of archer in the war. The priest, Kirei Kotomi, works as his ally during the conflict as the master of the assassin class. The Mato family chooses Karia as their master of berserker in the war, forcing him to fill the role in exchange for letting his son Shinji free from the family's harsh living. The other 3 chosen are Ryunosuke, a serial killer who summons Caster, their goal more inclined in killing with no motivation to seize the Grail. Waver, who summons Ryder as his servant and plays a major role in furthering the conflict in a positive direction. A member of the Magic Association is also chosen by the Grail to summon Lancer, his name being Kaneth. Throughout the early stages of the war, Iris and Saber work in a two-man cell, fighting off the other servants and masters while Kiritsugu creeps in the shadows to kill the masters. He seems cold and heartless on the outside, which for the most part is true. He's an anti-hero, but he does care for the ones he loves, even if it means having to cast them out of his life. His childhood trauma, rooted in his every decision, witnessing a genocidal cleansing by the church on the village island he grew up on with his father. His father's morally questionable research led to Kiritsugu having conflict with magic and alchemy, resulting in him shooting his father to stop his research. He was taken under the wing of a for-hire enforcer, leading him to become the Magus Killer, hunting heretical mages like his father. He soon became aware that the horrors he saw in the village as a kid is commonplace, and so is war. His only goal is to win and wish on the Grail for peace by any means necessary. Kirei, however, is unaware of Kiritsugu's ambition and believes him to act without purpose or goals, like himself. It's not off to say that Kirei is a sociopath, with no aspirations and nothing in life to hold dear, and he's found meaning in the pursuit of hunting Kiritsugu. He abandons his help of Tokiomi in the war, killing him and becoming the master of the archer-class servant, Gilgamesh. He actively works to understand Kiritsugu, going so far as to kidnap his wife Iris, but when realizing from her that he and Kiritsugu are nothing alike, he strangles her to death, deciding to kill the man and wish for an end of humanity at the final battle for the Grail. The other masters work to fulfill their own goals, but none are as interesting as these two, the main focus and tale of the story. Castor and Ryunosuke perish early in the war. Tokiomi was betrayed and killed, Mato slowly losing his mind from trying to sustain his servant Berserker, eventually dying against the battle with Saber. His actions before his death are disturbing, having killed the woman he loves, Tokiomi's wife, after she refused his advances on her. He dreams of escaping the Mato residence with Sakura and Shinji, hoping to get the two to safety along with the dead woman he loves, murdered at his hand. He may have tried to be a hero, but when the fates rejected him, his decisions led to bloodshed and fear. Waver gives up his role as master and commands Ryder to fulfill his own desires, abandoning the game, the happiest ending you'll see throughout this series. Kenneth is assassinated by Kiritsugu's assistant Maya, leaving the only remaining masters Kirei and Kiritsugu. She and Kiritsugu also commit adultery, my assumption being that Kiritsugu was self-destructing, preparing himself to betray his wife later on when he must sacrifice her to obtain the Grail, given that she's the homunculus of it. Ryder is defeated by Gilgamesh, and the two remaining masters and their servants square off. Kirei loses against Kiritsugu, ending the Holy Grail War, and for the first time in its existence, a victor is crowned. The corpse of his wife transforms into the Lesser Grail, Kiritsugu transported into its essence, even though two servants, Saber and Gilgamesh, still remain. As it turns out, the Grail transforms into a wish granter after 5 or 6 servants are consumed. If all 7 were to be absorbed, the Greater Grail would activate, resulting in the destruction of the world due to the corruption it suffered after the Third War with the absorption of Angra. Kiritsugu realizes this when confronted by a spirit that claims to be his wife, which is somewhat true and somewhat not. She's merged with the entity and is no longer her individual self. The Grail shows him his true wish and the spin it will put on it. While he may say he wants peace, his deepest desire is to live peacefully with his wife and daughter, but the cost is the complete annihilation of humans besides the 3 of them. Kiritsugu cannot give up his duty to bring peace to the world for the sake of bringing his wife back, and is forced to murder the apparitions of his daughter and wife, stealing his resolve. The Grail curses him as he strangles her, leaving him with only more pain and trauma than what he entered with. Coming back to, he orders Saber to destroy the Grail, much to her dismay, having wanted to use it to save her people, unaware of the Grail's corruption. She is forced into action with Kiritsugu's final command spells. Gilgamesh is caught in the liquid pouring from the Grail, as is the corpse of Kirei. Upon the Grail's destruction, Angra hastily chooses Kirei as the Grail War's winner by default, his body being flooded by the Grail's liquid, returning him to life. Gilgamesh's body touches the liquid and is granted a physical form, no longer bound by the master-servant bond. It grants Kirei's desired wish of destruction along with his revival, leveling all of Fuyuki in a fiery destruction. He and Gilgamesh decide to wait till the next Grail War, where they plan to win and bring destruction to humanity. Saber is returned to the battlefield she was initially pulled from, defeated mentally, having not accomplished her goal of saving her people. Her story will eventually continue though. Kiritsugu pulls an amnesic orphan from the rubble of the fires that he would later adopt and teach the basic principles of magecraft, naming him Shiroi Emiya. He would attempt to retrieve his daughter Ilya from the ice burns until eventually dying from the curse that the Grail/Anga had put upon him after refusing to wish on it. It's assumed that the Grail War will continue some 50-60 years down the line, as has been common. But given that the Greater Grail did not disperse the souls of the fallen servants as it normally would, it instead uses that magic energy to push up the next conflict conflict to only 10 years down the road, catching all three families off guard and launching the Fifth Holy Grail War, one that has three possible conclusions. The three possible routes of the Fifth Holy Grail War all begin the same. The child adopted by Kiritsugu Shido finds himself mixed into the war with no understanding of its principles, chosen to be the master for Saber despite lacking a strong pool of magic, making his servant's movements restricted. Rin guides him into this war, introducing him to Kirei, who explains the basic workings of the conflict. The masters remain the same in all three timelines. Rin, the daughter of the deceased Tokiomi, acts as Archer's master. Unbeknownst to her, the man she trusts is the same one who killed her father. Idia acts as the Iceburn's appointed master, summoning Berserker. Shinji, the Mato family's master, summoning Rider. Kuzuki is one of the random masters chosen, stumbling upon Castor and entering the war. And Kirei takes Lancer as a servant after killing his unknown original master. Gilgamesh works with him in the shadows to pull the strings in the Fifth War. The Seventh Master never shows himself in this timeline and remains shrewd in mystery until the Heavens Field timeline. Shido's entire goal centers around protecting Saber and playing the war safe. He isn't all that interested in winning, which frustrates Saber. A confrontation with Shinji and Rider leads him to abandon his sheltering after deciding that more will die if he sits this out. Shinji wanting to sacrifice the students in their school to strengthen Rider. Saber and Shido defeat him here. Ilya, as we know, is a homunculus and the prime goal of Kirei, who desires to resummon the Grail and wish for more destruction, unsatisfied by the fires 10 years prior. Shido confronts the man after he kidnaps and uses her to summon the Grail. Him and Saber kill him, Gilgamesh and Lancer. The fate line ending somewhat smoothly, Shido and Saber deciding to turn down the corrupt Grail's wish granting and ending the conflict, and hopefully future wars. There's no way of knowing if they've actually prevented the Grail wars from continuing, and we're left wondering what the future could hold. Unlimited Blade Works begins the same as the Fate line, diverging at the fight between Archer and Saber, Shido's lack of control over his servant sending the story in a new direction. Despite Saber going off on her own path to the Grail, Shido desires to stop the war alone. Kirei dies in this timeline after killing Ilya and trying to put the homunculus heart inside Rin to summon the Grail, Lancer being his killer after Kirei uses up all his command spells, the two dying together early. Archer betrays Rin, revealing he is an alternate version of Shido who desires to stop himself from choosing this path of being a hero. With the help of Rin, who is the romantical interest this time around instead of Saber, Shido fights his alternate reality self, who in the end sacrifices himself to save the Shido of this world. Archer's self-sacrifice and change in heart towards his present self influences Saber to forsake the Grail, coming to terms with what is the current reality, the death of her kingdom's people, and along with Rin decides to destroy the Grail. The Fifth Holy Grail War once more ending with its future uncertain and unknown. The character with the prominent role of this timeline is Sakura Mato, who we know to truly be Tokiomi's other daughter and Nin's sister. Shido's simple act of walking her home transforms the story once more. Because of the altered timeline, Sakura learns that she is the true master of Rider and seizes back control from her pseudo-brother Shinji. Zoken, her pseudo-grandfather and leader of the Mato family, who is revealed to be the seventh master in the Grail War, his servant being the assassin, places a shard of the corrupted Lesser Grail into her body, infecting her with the Iranian god of evil, Angra. Her personality begins to shift as Angra seizes more control over her body. Saber and Berserker are corrupted by this same force, becoming servants to Sakura. Shido, despite the corruption, refuses to kill the girl. Archer, mortally wounded himself, gives Shido his arm to prevent his death, hoping it will be of use to him in solving the conflict. Kirei becomes involved in the conflict, trying to attain control over corrupted Sakura from Zoken. He also hopes to obtain Ilya, who Zoken kidnapped, and summon the Grail, as has always been his goal. For the time being, he and Shido team up to defeat Zoken and free Ilya, which they are successful in doing. However, when confronted by Sakura, given her new connection to the corruption within the Grail, she stops Kirei's black heart that was given to him at the end of the Fourth War, leaving him with only a few hours to live. He and Shido pull back, but they both enter battle against each other as their goals no longer line up and once more conflict. Kirei eventually died from his failing heart in the battle between the two. Shido feels that he and Kirei are a very very similar people, both hollow, seeking for a meaning to their lives. The only difference is what they filled that hole with. One choosing to protect a young girl, the other wishing to bring out Angra and watch the destruction of the world. Chiro confronts Sakura and uses the power Archer passed to him to cut her connection with Angra. Iria sacrifices herself to end the Grail system of Heaven's Feel, using her status as a homunculus to bring it all crashing down. Chiro dies due to injuries, but is brought back by her using the lost third magic of the Iceburn lineage, having found the spell when merging with the Grail to destroy it. His soul is materialized and later transferred to a puppet body by Rin to bring him back to life. The Heaven's Feel Grail wars come to a certain conclusion, ending in a battlefield full of sacrifice and loss. Sakura was saved and restored to herself. The question will always linger: was the loss to do so too great? That's a pretty good way to wrap up the universe. Fate Night is, in a simple sense, 3 stories wrapped as one, all better when tied together. The order you watch in is not all that important, but if you're looking for the best way to enjoy it, I would watch Zero first. It's the best story in the Fate universe and the best starting point for anyone who wants to enter into it. You can follow that up by watching all 3 timelines of Fate Stay Night. The original series is not as good of an animation, but even with that in mind, it's best to watch it first for the other 2 stories, Blade Works and Heaven's Feel, to carry the same amount of impact. Which is why Zero should be watched first. If you liked that, it's worth sitting through a more dated show to witness the amazing youth-foldable animation of Heaven's Feel. If that's not your style, Heaven's Feel and Zero are definitely the best entries of the series. Now, if you're someone who wants to watch the spin-offs, I pray for you. There's really no great way around these, so here's how I rank them and how you should watch them. Fate Strange Fake is interesting in what you should come off Heaven's Feel with. Fate Extra Last Encore is a great spin-off as well. Apocrypha, the Apocalypse one, is a small step down from that. If you want to watch a wizard drama and for some odd reason we're a super fan for this kid in Zero, Case Files is a worthwhile watch. Carnival Phantasm isn't worth it unless you're a hardcore fan of Type Moon. Prototype is like watching someone play a beta version of Fate and isn't really that worthwhile. It kind of strikes me as like an EP. And today's menu makes you feel less hollow after watching a large portion of the cast die in both Zero and Heaven's Feel. I would recommend them. If you think I'm missing one show, you are absolutely right, and it is definitely intentional. If you want to expose yourself to this unique take on the Fate universe, you have lost your sanity. There is not a tier of ranking suiting for this amalgamation of lolly yaoi fan service disguised as a Fate alternative timeline. If you do like it, hey, good for you. Did I? Maybe a younger version of me did, but I can't look my teenage child's self in the eyes without slapping him for giving Ordi Emo an 8 out of 10, which has, by the way, since been revoked. But I think my original ranking of that series gives you an idea of what kind of person would recommend Fate Khalid Linear instead of Fate Zero. Do with that information what you will. If you like that stuff, go ahead. There was a point where I did too. While Fate isn't a thematically hard to understand show, the principles and ideals rather easy to digest. The difficulty in understanding and explaining this series is in its spiderweb of a universe and timeline, and that's what I set out to make sense of here. A different approach to the more psychological and philosophical animes I've approached so far, but nonetheless Fate deserves to be covered for its deep complex lore and lengthy and confusing timeline. Hopefully you now understand the Fate Nasuverse better. Maybe you don't. Not sure you can blame me at that point. I thought I condensed it pretty well here. It's basically just a giant spiderweb of spin-offs, which isn't unheard of. If you've watched Fate already, you probably walked away with a bit more knowledge on the universe. If you've never watched it, stop hanging around here and go do that. Fate's an anime staple, you're missing out on it. Well, I'll see you next time. Subscribe to keep up with this stuff and tell me what you want to see covered next. Patreon members, you know you guys have a louder voice. Be sure to tell me what you want over there. Check the Twin Souls store for my merch, and I'm out of here. Saber is my one and only, and Rin is my op. You're lying if you disagree. Jana.